We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. The issues involving divergent ideals and ideologies have been determined on the battlefields of the world, and hence are not for our discussion or debate. The terms and conditions upon which surrender of the Japanese imperial forces is here to be given and accepted are contained in the instrument of surrender now before you.
By the summer of 1945, the defeat of Japan is a foregone conclusion. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Air Forces have been destroyed, and the Allied blockade is devastating the country's economy. The roads out of Tokyo are clogged with refugees attempting to escape the daily visits by US bombers, and with some 8.5 million civilians and workers fleeing the cities across the country, Japan's war industry grinds to a halt. Despite the reports of a military survey carried out in February 1945, which concluded that Japan could not win the war, its militaristic government cannot contemplate surrender and vow to fight on, ultimately subjecting their people to more and more suffering. By the end of June, US forces have captured the Japanese home island of Okinawa, which will act as a staging area for the upcoming invasion of Japan. However, with US commanders predicting casualties for the invasion to exceed 1.2 million men, US President Harry Truman orders 2 atomic strikes to be carried out in a last-ditch attempt to bring a swift end to the Second World War. On August 6, the US bomber Enola Gay drops an atomic bomb on the port city of Hiroshima, killing 75,000 people in the blink of an eye. But Japan's Supreme War Council still resists accepting the Allies' offer of unconditional surrender. So 3 days later, on August 9th, a second bomb is dropped on the city of Nagasaki, killing a further 35,000 people. Later that evening, the Japanese Supreme War Council tables a motion to finally throw in the towel, but with the vote tied, Prime Minister Suzuki consults Emperor Hirohito and urges him to break the deadlock. Hirohito accepts the terms of surrender with the understanding that the declaration does not compromise any demand that prejudices the prerogatives of His Majesty and the sovereign ruler. On August 10th, the Council relays the message to the United States. The Allies, relieved by the news after years of bloody conflict, agree to respect the sovereign status of the Japanese Emperor on the condition that he should be subject to the directives of the Supreme Commander of the Allied powers. 4 days later, on August 14th, the Japanese government agrees to this proviso. Despite their emperor's decision, a small group of die-hard opponents of the surrender, led by Major Kenji Hatanaka, attempt a coup, and in the early hours of August 15th, they attack the Imperial Palace, killing the general of the Imperial Guard before finally being subdued. At noon that day, Emperor Hirohito goes on national radio for the first time in history and urges his people to bear the unbearable and accept surrender. His message, however defeated, does not once include the word defeat, perhaps reflecting his refusal to face the reality that Japan has lost the war. Back in Washington, D.C., the small rebellion by fanatical Japanese commanders has made the Allies nervous. By sending General Douglas MacArthur to Japan, will they be sending him into a trap? MacArthur does not believe so, and he is right. As he arrives at Atsugi Airfield just outside Yokohama, he's treated with the utmost respect. 2 Japanese divisions line the road between the airfield and Yokohama's Grand Hotel, where MacArthur will establish his headquarters. With their backs facing MacArthur, they show him the same respect they would give their emperor. The formal surrender of the Japanese takes place on September 2nd aboard the USS Missouri, flagship of the US Pacific Fleet anchored in Tokyo Bay. Flying from the Missouri's foremast is the flag that had been flown above the US Capitol on December 7th, 1941, a poignant reminder to that fateful day which started it all. As a display of power, more than 250 ships representing all the Allied powers are anchored in the bay. But as a precaution, Raymond Spruance commands a US carrier task force anchored out of sight some distance off the Japanese coast in case of a late show of aggression by the Japanese. The formal surrender ceremony begins at 9 a.m., with 9 members of the Japanese delegation, led by Foreign Minister Mamoru, signing the treaty on behalf of the Emperor and Japanese government. MacArthur is next to sign and declares, "It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past." Representatives from the 10 remaining Allied powers sign the treaty, and at 9:30 a.m. hundreds of Allied warplanes from nearby carriers and land bases fly over Tokyo as additional ground troops land at Tokyo Bay, ushering in the Allied occupation of Japan and officially signaling the end of the Second World War.